Hello, once again, welcome to my channel where I share my programming experience. And in this video, I will discuss how we can automate the creation of REST API documentation using OpenAPI. If you're also working as a programmer, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon as I upload programming related videos every now and then, which might be helpful to you. Let's begin. Our topic for today is how to add OpenAPI Swagger documentation to your Spring REST API project. Prior to Spring version 2.2.0, we have Swagger version 2, which works well with Spring version less than 2.0, and Swagger version 3, which work with Spring version 2.0 to document our REST API in a Spring project. A good API is very helpful, especially for API client developers. And moreover, it is very important to always generate the most latest API documentation available so that everyone is in sync. This process could be tedious without the automated feature available in Swagger. Swagger versus OpenAPI. OpenAPI is the specification, while Swagger is one of the reference implementations. We can say that OpenAPI has become one of the legacies of Swagger. For more information, a comparison is available from this website, which I will make available in the description of this video. Now let's start documenting a Spring REST API project with OpenAPI. Here are the steps. Number 1. Create a new Springwood project and add the following dependencies at a minimum. I'm using Spring STS IDE, so please download it from the Spring website. And here I have created a Keycloak Spring project using the Spring Boot template project. And here I have added the dependencies that I've mentioned in my blog, which are the Spring Boot Starter Actuator, Spring Boot Starter Web, and Spring Doc OpenAPI-UI. With this dependency, OpenAPI version 3 specification as well as HTML documentation are automatically generated. We just need to configure, or we just need to add some configuration in our form file. Number 2. Set the following in application.properties in case we want to override. springdoc.api-docs.path. This is the OpenAPI documentation. It will be available under this URL, API docs. And we have the springdoc.swagger-ui.path, which we override. So these are the default values, and these are the override values, which we have here. So later on, when we run our application, these two endpoints should be available. Note, there is no need to add a dependency springdoc-openapi-core since we already added the OpenAPI-UI, so this one. Otherwise, you will encounter an error. And number 4, to generate the JSON and YML OpenAPI description during build time, we need to add the plugin springdoc-openapi-maven-plugin and modify the configuration since we changed the default URLs. So see the code below. And this is the code that I am referring to in our project. It's available in our form.xml file. Here I have added some executions to the Spring Boot Maven plugin, and here is the springdoc-openapi-maven plugin where I set the API docs URL to API docs, which is the value we set here. And then we change the output name into openapi.json. So later we will see this file. And finally, let's run the application, and we should be able to access the following pages. I have already ran my application beforehand, and now let's try accessing the URLs that we have configured here, the API docs and Swagger docs. Here is the API docs, and this contains the OpenAPI specification, which should also be available under our targets folder. So this is that file. It was saved here because we have configured it in the OpenAPI Maven plugin. It should be saved in the target directory with the file name openapi.json. Now let's try accessing the second URL, which is the Swagger docs. By default, again, it is swagger-ui.html. So now let's try accessing the Swagger docs or Swagger UI. By default, it's swagger-ui.html, but remember, we have overridden it into Swagger docs. And that's why when we type swagger-docs, it redirects to this URL. And as we can see, it is consuming or using the API docs specification that we specified in our OpenAPI Maven plugin, which is this URL, API docs. So this is the one. That's why if we don't change this, then we will not get this documentation. And finally, here is the Swagger or API, OpenAPI documentation that is automatically created by the plugin. It makes API documentation so much easier. For example, we have this customer bin or entity, and we have this constraints, not blank size. We can add at email or whatever constraints we wanted it to have. So this one has a minimum value of 18. And then if we look at the data model, for example, in the post, we can check that it has the customer parameter, and this is the customer schema. So it has an ID, a name, which has these constraints, which basically it gets or it reads from our customer model. And I think that's it for this video. If you learned something, please do subscribe to my channel, especially if you are a programmer. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!